I'm what they call a creature of the night. It's not uncommon for me to stay up till the rising of the sun. In fact, most weekends I do just that. So, it wasn't unusual for me to be up at 2 a.m. on a Saturday morning. It was unusual to receive a phone call at that time. Still, I didn't think much of it. I have a fairly large family, and my grandma had been in and out of the hospital recently. I picked up the phone, and I said, "Hello, is there anyone there?" There were no intelligible words I could make out. It was just rustling and low growling noises coming from the other end of the line. I hung the phone up, figuring it was some kids playing a practical joke. I picked up my controller and resumed playing my game. When the phone rang again, I didn't even bother picking it up. The phone rang a third time, and once again I ignored it. On the fourth ring, I was fed up with the little brats. I answered, yelling into the receiver, "Stop calling me." This time, I got a response. The person on the other end said, "Terrence, you're going to pay." "Pay for what?" I asked. A click was the only response I received. This had to be a prank from one of my brain-dead friends. I was not a bad guy, and couldn't think of anything I had done to anyone. Still, my heart was beating faster and I could hardly keep myself from looking outside the window. I decided to make a preliminary check around my house. I've seen enough horror movies to know the possible ways of entry. I made sure all the doors were locked and windows were shut. As I rounded back to my gaming chair, I looked out the window to see a lone man standing directly underneath the street light across the street from my house. He was holding a large fire axe and had some sort of mask over his face. To my dismay, he was slowly crossing the street directly up to my house. Officially, I began to freak out. I did my civic duty and promptly let the cops know. At this point, the man had marched directly to my front door and began smashing it with his axe. I was still in college at this time, so the dump of a house I was renting was not known for having reinforced anything. With a few heavy strikes, the masked stranger had the door sliced into ribbons. I was hiding in my bedroom, in my closet. If I could just remain hidden long enough for the police to arrive, then I'd be okay. My bedroom door was kicked in, and I heard the man checking underneath the bed. Next, he moved to the bathroom. My heart began to beat outside of my chest. There was nowhere else to check but the closet. Still, I heard no sirens. It looked as if it was up to me. I closed my eyes in resolve, and prepared for the man to open the door. I heard his heavy footfalls making the old floorboards creak with each step. As he neared, my breaths became more rapid. He must have been able to hear them. No point in hiding anymore. He was reaching for the door. I exploded into motion, kicking the heavy wooden door directly into his face with so much force it came off of its hinges. The intruder was slammed across the room. In seconds, I was on top of him, ripping him to shreds with my bare hands. All was over in a flash. After all, I am a creature of the night. To whom it may concern, my name is irrelevant, as I dare not confront the shame that this confession may bring upon me. Yet, the animalistic instinct that is part of human nature constantly brings forth the sickening feeling of dread. As such, I am compelled to write this down so as to discard the many burdens that I have been carrying these last 4 months. I don't know how it happened. Or perhaps I do, but I simply do not wish to admit to it. It all started after my husband left without saying a word, leaving me and our 7-year-old daughter fending for ourselves. I thought that an emergency came up and he had to leave early that morning, but after a week without responding to any of my messages, I feared the worst. It was out of the blue, as we had been together for almost 15 years. He loved me and he also loved our daughter. We were his treasure and his main joy in life. What a joke. After 2 weeks, I told my daughter what had happened and she simply wasn't the same after it. She stopped talking to me. Whenever she came back from school, she would go to her room without saying a word. In the 3rd week after I told her, she stopped eating alongside me. And little by little, she stopped attending school, eventually becoming a shut-in. A year passed, then 2, and eventually 8. And in the 8th year, I grew tired of it. She was being selfish. She wasn't the only one saddened by his departure. She wasn't also the only one who missed him. She was being selfish and just like him. It didn't help that she grew up looking like him. As such, I confronted her about it. I went into her room one night without knocking. She was startled at first, but immediately calmed down and told me to leave the food beside her door. I wasn't having it. So I told her what I had thought. I wasn't going to spare her from the truth, as she was indeed selfish. She didn't react to it initially, however. Upon telling her that she had to move on, she blamed me for all of it. She said that it was my fault that her father had left her. It was because I was always disconnected from everyone. That I never bothered to express myself and I never cared nor loved them. The audacity. I left that room later on and went to bed regretting my decision. Upon awakening, my daughter was missing. I waited and waited. It was a fit, it had to be. That's how teenagers are. They are led by their emotions. She will be back soon. She had to, but she never did. After 24 hours, I went and filled a missing persons report. People took pity upon me and the news spread like wildfire. Soon, there were dozens of people volunteering for her search, so I joined in as well. She wasn't in our little town. That was a known fact. Thus, we were divided into 4 separate groups to search for her throughout the forest that surrounded our little town. I searched everywhere. I scouted from the hills, went through the most heavily forested areas, and even searched every inch from the depths of the river. There was no use in searching. She had a whole day to move forward. Furthermore, our group searched every part of the forest, which took even more time. And the majority of the group wasn't willing to go too far ahead into the forest. It was utterly hopeless. A useless endeavor. After 3 weeks, I gave up. I stopped going and spent my time cleaning up the house. What a chore. There was a time when my living space was home, with a loving husband and a caring daughter. I miss those days. I have to stop remembering. It's too painful. The past is the past and I had to move on. I knew they weren't going to find her. Until one day, when there was a sudden knock at the door. I opened it and was met with the sheriff and my daughter. I couldn't believe it. She was standing before me. Before I could even react, she walked toward me and gave me a big hug. She even whispered in my ears that she was sorry. The sheriff said that he'll leave her to tell me what happened and that he was going to leave us to it. It was a pleasant month after her return. She started talking to me again. She sat beside me at the dinner table and even started going back to school. She was my last fragment of hope. A remembrance of a better time. However, that would have been the case had it all been the truth. I believed in a lie this entire month, a lie too good to be true, but also a statement that I knew was a lie. Whoever is in my daughter's room isn't my daughter. She looks like her. She acts like her. And she even sounds like her, but I know she isn't her. Why do I know that? Because I killed my daughter. I killed her that night when we argued. I took her body to the forest and buried her in a place no one would ever find, but from the moment I laid my hands on her, I regretted it. She was right. It was all my fault. I deserve what's coming to me. I am sorry, my beloved. Please forgive me. Groans of joints unashamed to flaunt how unkempt they were squeaked relentlessly. The one thing James couldn't fix. James sat leant against the window enjoying the peace and quiet. He stared at nothing in particular, though his eyes flicked back and forth as they dragged along with the passing scenery. Droplets of rain trickled down the windows as various flora flashed by enshrouded by the gray sky above. Other than the occasional announcement across the crackly speakers and the constant thrum of an outdated engine, the rest of the train was ghostly quiet. He blinked momentarily as the train passed through a tunnel. The low lights in the carriage did little to soften the transition, and as the tunnel re-emerged the other side, James had been shaken from his trance. He looked around and stretched, refocusing on the music in his headphones, uncertain of how many songs had passed since he zoned out. The rest of the carriage remained quiet and motionless like a desert on a still day. When the train pulled into a station, no one stirred in James' carriage. A mother and her 2 children did sit down a few rows in front, however. It wasn't long until the 2 children started screaming at each other about something minor, so James turned up his music and went back to staring out the window. He tried to drown out the children, but they seemed to pierce the sanctity of his music no matter what he tried. He did his best to ignore them as he was getting off at the next stop anyway. The scenery outside disappeared in an instant as the train entered another tunnel. James stared into the darkness. The cacophony of the children screeching mixed with his blaring music made him wince with nothing else to distract him. But by some miracle, the children stopped. Maybe the prattling of the mother had finally shut them up. The train emerged on the other side of the tunnel in perfect silence. For the first time that journey, James let out a smile. His eyes caught a glimpse of his reflection as his teeth glistened red.